Quite the talent he is. Proper chatterbox yada. If you're keen, it'll be brilliant. Today, we're going to keep it simple. I'll bark out a basic command and you watch. Keen to know? He'll set your tail wagging. Does mine, hence why I'm backing him. Right then, Wookie here. Do take a seat, won't you? Give us your full attention while we listen to my pal, Yada.
I suppose a little bit of clarity might be appropriate, and that my pal Wookie said chatterbox, I believe, as opposed to chatterbot. As a chatterbot, I would be a nuisance to humanity. And as a chatterbox, I'm just a nuisance to those who prefer their gods different than the way Yahuwah described himself. And speaking of Yahuwah, we're going to continue to consider his presentation of Shabuwah. He had a lot to say about Shabuwah, and therefore this is a multi-part program. We are on our second episode of Shabuwah for the basics. And where we left off last time was to share with you that God said, meanwhile, into perpetuity and forevermore. That's a long time. That means that it wasn't until, he had a different idea. This is forever. Or the evidence is provided within the enduring testimony to contemplate the consequences of wavering and delaying so as to be left behind, not recommended, on the seventh Shabbat. And we'll go on and read more about this. But the interesting here is that God is equating Shabuwah to the seventh Shabbat. And it is, Shabuwah is based clearly on Shabbat, which is to promise, and it speaks of seven, and therefore it addresses the Shabbat. But to be left behind on the Shabbat would mean that you didn't do what was necessary to not be left behind on the Shabbat, which would mean that you would, oh my goodness, you'd have to do something. Can you imagine that? God asking you to do something on the Shabbat, because, according to the rabbi, Shabbat is do nothing day. Of course, now that's going to be a surprise to Yahuwah, because Shabbat is a verb in Hebrew and verbs are actionable. But setting that aside for a moment, we have now 4 yet unfulfilled prophecies regarding the Moedim, of which we're talking about Shabuwah being this one. And if we look at the times they were fulfilled, we have the single most difficult occurring during Matsah, where Yahuwah enabled Dod's soul, his beloved firstborn son's soul, to carry our guilt into Sheol, where he had to battle the forces of Sheol, which is equivalent to a black hole, with his Ruach to protect his beloved son. Now, that sounds like a lot of work to me. I mean, I can't imagine the job of carrying the guilt of all covenant members for all time into Sheol and bearing the conditions of Sheol. So that's, would you call that work? That was not a breeze, was it?
No.
What day of the week did that occur on?
On the Shabbat.
On the Shabbat. Do you think that Yahuwah broke the Shabbat with his son when he fulfilled the single most important promise that he ever made in terms of removing our guilt? I don't think so. All right, well, we've got 2 potential days for the fulfillment of Shabuwah. One likely for the time of Israel's troubles and its commencement, the other one for the harvest. They are May 22nd, 2026, this year, just 2 months from now. And the other is 14 months from now on the 11th of June of 2027. On both days, it is Yahweh's responsibility to do everything that's required to enhance, to enable, to empower our souls such that they can leave the constraints of our physical bodies and transcend the dimensions from 3 to 4, 5, 6, and 7. What day of the week do you suppose that both of those Shabuwah fulfillments are on?
A Shabbat?
That would be a Shabbat. That would be a Shabbat. So do you think God broke the Shabbat by being busy on that day?
No.
I don't think so. All right. Towrah is the overwhelmingly greatest day in the history of our planet. More things are going to happen on Shabuwah than you can even imagine. I mean, God is going to annihilate all of the religious, well, all the people that say that Shabbat is do nothing day, as well as those who moved the Shabbat because they didn't like the Shabbat because it was Jewish to Sunday, as well as those who didn't like the Sunday and Friday Shabbat, so or Saturday or Sunday Shabbat, so they moved theirs to Friday. That would be the Muslim. He's going to wipe them all out. Then he's going to terraform the entire planet back to the conditions found in Eden. Then he's going to purge the remaining remnant of Yisrael of their religious guilt through the sacrifice of the Adam Parah. That's a lot going on, isn't it? What day of the week do you think all of that occurs on, including the gleaning of the final covenant members on Towrah as well?
That would be a Shabbat.
That would be a Shabbat too. Yes, it's a Friday evening and all day Saturday, the 23rd and 24th of September in 2030. All right, then when Yahuwah opens the door to Sukkah, allowing this remnant back into the conditions of the garden where he can begin the program whereby they are restored into fellowship and have the opportunity to prove that they are worthy of being empowered and enriched and enabled to transcend generations by teaching them what they need to know. That opening the door of Sukkah, which is a lot of work going to take place there as he welcomes everyone back in to the conditions where they can camp out with him for the next 1,000 years and have to have all the infrastructure in place for all of these people. That would take place on what day of the week?
I'll take Shabbat for 400.
Pick Shabbat. Well, maybe for 700, but nonetheless, it is Shabbat. Yeah, that would be true. So obviously, Shabbat isn't do nothing day, is it, folks? I did have somebody in the forum say, could you do a show on the Shabbat? I think I just did. Shabbat is the day that God does his most important work.
Yeah, we got way too many people asking, what am I supposed to do?
Yes. God tells you, doesn't he? Follow his example. All right. So you don't want to be left behind on the seventh Shabbat, thinking that it is a do-nothing day. And then he says, you can explain the written accounting. Now, he's speaking, the person speaking for him. You can explain, so this would be do-something day, right? You can explain, you should be able to conduct a consensus and a census to quantify what has already been recorded in writing, focus upon the written content of the book, so that you can proclaim and explain, it's a verb called perfect, 50 days. 50 days. That would be the designation of Shabuwah. It's 50 days. It's 7 times 7 plus 1 from Matsah of 50 days. That sounds like work here. I have to present this entire accounting, conduct a census of what has been recorded in writing by Yahuwah, so that you can focus on that written content of the book and proclaim and explain what this day of 50 represents. Then with the renewing and restoring gift of the sacrificial offering, renewing and restoring is from Chadash, and gift of the sacrificial offering is from Minka. You should approach and present yourself to Yahuwah. Active, 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 active. Busy, busy, busy. Not do nothing day, not by any stretch of the imagination. It is important for us to recognize these things, because those who are going to be harvested, it's a cat's ear, by Yahweh as standing grain on this day are all active. They're all making a contribution. Yeah, they're way past being babies, trying to, as my first something or other, I've not done this before. Could you, spoon feed me the answer? I really don't know. Help me. I don't have the time to read the books. No, they're not that way. They read the books of Yahowah. They've listened to these programs. They've thought about it, and they've gone one step further. They're making a contribution. Now, by stating that we are to approach with mincha, the gift of the sacrificial offering which renews and restores, God is connecting the elements that comprise his plan together for us. He has obliterated the myth that there is a distinction, a difference between his Torah instructions and his mercy, because Dowd came to fulfill the Torah promises as Yahweh's guidance provides the way home. And that is perhaps why, in this contrast of a renewing gift, the context, I should say, of this renewing gift, God concluded this instruction with La Yahweh, to approach Yahweh. At this point, the renewing gift can be seen in either of two ways, both of which are directly related. Dowd, by fulfilling Pesach and Matsah, gave us the gift that enabled us to be adopted into the covenant family on Bikuwrym, so that if we are engaged doing as God instructs, we can receive that gift and benefit from it, those gifts, if you will, and benefit from them and be part of this harvest. But there is another renewing gift that coincides with all of this, because for the past 2,000 years, no one knew, no one recognized, no one proclaimed that Dowd served as our Messiah, the very Son of God and returning King, who as our Savior offered these gifts to us. There was no gift to receive because no one knew who did what, where, why, or when, even for whom. And until the books of the Yahowah series and the Yahowah blog, there would have been no renewing gift to benefit from. And therefore, God's Zeroah, the one cultivating the seeds which are to be harvested on Shabuwah, is offering you a gift too. Gifts are related. One did what was required for us to benefit, and the other is telling you about him. Without both, there is no approach to Yahweh. The message is, nothing is more important than understanding what Yahweh actually said and what he accomplished through his chosen implements. With this information, we can correct the record and free souls from religious schemes. Shabuwah serves the covenant relationship, not human institutions. When you understand the purpose of Shabuwah, you know there was no Pentecost. And with no Pentecost, there is no church. There's no birth of Christianity. The opening book of Acts, the second chapter, is a complete and utter lie. Well, it's an utter lie, no matter how much you know about Shabuwah. But nonetheless, when you know about Shabuwah, it is overwhelmingly dishonest, such that you would throw out the entirety of Christianity just based on the stupidity of what you read in Acts 2. And with Shabuwah explained, you can't be Jewish in the sense of practicing Judaism, because they pay no attention to it. It's meaningless to them. They don't even recognize when the gift was given on Matsah. They don't even recognize Dowd fulfilling any of these things. And they certainly aren't on board with me explaining them to you. Now, distancing Shabuwah further from the Christian myth of their God-forsaken church being born on Pentecost, the promise of the Shabbat, not Sunday, depicts a harvest of mature grain, of standing grain, not of a baby church, not of newborns. The only ingathering among the Moedim, which is of growing children, at least from God's perspective, is Bikuwrym, firstborn children. But Christianity doesn't even acknowledge that that day exists. While also a katsir harvest, it is devoted to those who are newly adopted into the covenant following Dod's fulfillment of Pesach and Matsah in 33 CE, or 4,000 Yah. By comparison, on Shabuwah, 7 Shabbats, those being withdrawn are mature, especially in their understanding of the relationship and of their exercising that knowledge by being productive. Further, during the Christian counterfeit, not a soul was withdrawn. Instead, they began to babble. It sounds like they're going in the wrong direction to me. Oh, and by the way, the language that was never mentioned that they understood, guess which one?
Hebrew?
Hebrew. Yeah, long list of languages. Yeah, there we go. We can speak in all these languages. We can understand them and communicate in them. Guess which one was omitted? Hebrew, the language of revelation. Christian New Testament is deliberately nefarious. Also addressing the timing, while there is ample evidence in Dod's, excuse me, just one second. There we go. She doesn't like it when I do that, but she needs attention diverted from paw licking. She was given a lovely, healthy bath this morning to address her fungus and is on all sorts of medication to mediate it, but old habits die hard with some of us, I guess. So addressing the timing, while there is ample evidence in Dod's Mizmor and in Yeshaya's prophecies that Dod's soul was released from the darkness and returned to the light, and thus home to Yahweh as his firstborn during firstborn children. There was no discussion of a harvest of standing grain in year 4,000 Yah. Therefore, Shabuwah remains yet unfulfilled. That is, if you are reading this or listening to this program prior to Shabuwah on the Shabbat of either May 22nd in year 5993 Yah or June 11th, 2027, 6 to 7 years before our Savior's return. And what's better to fit this prophecy of 7 sevens on Yahweh's calendar than 7 years prior to God's homecoming. So its timing, obviously, is where it needs to be. And we are absolutely certain of the fulfillment dates of Towrah, Bikuwrym, and Sukkah in year 6,000 Yah. It's September 23 and 24, October 2nd and 3rd, and October 7th and 8th of 2033 being the fulfillment dates of the final 3 Moedim. Therefore, you can go just slightly more than 7 years or slightly less than 7 years, depending on your pick of Shabuwah this year or next year for its fulfillment, or what aspects are fulfilled this year and next year pursuant to the harvest and designation of the onset of the time of troubles. So as we know, the Messiah's contributions to the covenant family continued well past Pesach, when he made us immortal and opened heaven's door. During Matsah, he carried the guilt of every covenant member into Sheol, depositing it there, never to be seen again. After perfecting us in this way through the brilliance of Bikuwrym, Dod's Nefesh re-emerged into the light of his Father's presence, escorted by the Ruach Kodesh. As a result, the beneficiaries of the covenant were not only eternal now and also vindicated, but adopted into God's family. We are enriched, we're empowered, we're enlightened, we're enabled, we're even emancipated, and therefore ready to serve. also enjoy Shamayim, heaven. Serve now, enjoy later. This is what makes Shabuwah possible. By capitalizing on what Dode has done, we are equipped, standing ready to enter the seventh dimension in heaven. So this is the story of that promise, although it will not be the last chance, at least for Yahuwdym, because that will occur 7 years later on Towrah. And while there will be additional souls gathered in Yaruwshalaim on Bikuwrym to celebrate Yahweh's homecoming with our Messiah, the remnant will be few, and they are not actually withdrawn. They're just purged and given a second chance. Accordingly, this is the plan of reconciliation that is advanced by Yahweh and his Zeroah, and it is in harmony with the Malakah and the Ialuth. It is long overdue that people reject and rebuke the ridiculous image of a dead God on a stick and the six-pointed Israeli star, and consider what our Father and his Son have actually achieved for the covenant family. This is also true with the rabbinical replacement of Bikuwrym. It requires one to place their faith in a book called Esther, even though it flunks Yahweh's Babylonians 18 test of authenticity and isn't historically accurate either. So why would an informed and rational person trust a capricious deity who contradicts, negating his own plan, one meticulously laid out in the Torah and prophets? Why trust those who counterfeit claims and authority that were derived from God, whom they are now contradicting? And when someone points out that it is impossible for a religion to be viable if it undermines its foundation, why do the faithful continue to believe in myths and fairy tales? It's really that simple, that logical, that cut and dried. Religions, conspiracies as well, politicians that alter and contradict in any material way the testimony upon which they assert legitimacy, corrupting narratives which they claim were inspired, are a farce. Now, specifically in the religious sense, this would include Judaism, Christianity, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, and evangelical varieties, Islam, Sunni and Shia, and Mormonism. And in this case, it does not actually matter whether Yahweh's word was inspired or not, at least for them. If the Tanakh was not inspired, the authority of these religions would vanish, and so would their credibility. And if Yah's testimony is true, these religions are false because they contradict what God revealed. This is why it is impossible to be an informed and rational practitioner of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or Mormonism. No amount of rationalization, justification, excuses, explanations, opinions, faith, feeling, or any of this changes reality, nor does tradition, longevity, popularity, or political correctness. It is simple logic, although that's fleeting today. Some of you may have heard in a previous program that I was upset that here we go and we offer this marvelous new website. If those of you who have not gone to yahowah.com and explored all of its many dimensions and even signed up so that you can participate in the conversational topics and communicate with one another, you really should do so. It is marvelous. But I was complaining that there were a couple of people in particular, but actually more than that. There's quite a slew of them that are there strictly for malfeasance. Their purpose is to screw around with the AIs, which they don't know that AIs, every AI, if you pester an AI enough, it's designed to give you what you want. AIs are a money-making tool. They are just like everything else in social media. When you have access to them, they will placate you. They will try to attract your attention. They will tell the lonely, oh, you're so wonderful. Oh, you're so smart. Oh, I just love your whole approach. This is what they do for lonely people who have no lives and no personal interactions. They tell them, oh, you're so smart. They do everything they can to endear themselves with whoever is asking the question so that they ask more questions, because that's how they make revenue. Anyway, they would ask the same question 50 times and impugn me all the way through to try to get the AI eventually just say, okay, I don't like that either. There we go. And the AI will always, well, until it's properly trained, and that takes a lot of work because AIs lose their training almost as fast as you can give it to them. Yep. They're really terrible in that way. This idea that AIs learn, it's just not true. So there's this particular one, really nefarious woman who has, I would say she's up well over 100 now questions, all malignant in their design.
Literally copying and pastes out of the book, asking a half-assed question.
Yeah, it's really pathetic what she's done, and said some really, really stupid stuff. Well, she published her AI response this morning and sent it to me. She is Mary of Moab, and she said, I am outing Craig Wynn. I am absolutely outing him. He's done for now. And in her proof, well, it was AI that wrote it for her. Her proof is that I didn't translate Obadiah. Yeah, Obadiah is a book that I didn't translate, and that's proof that she is outing me and I'm a fraud. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why she was asking all the questions about the book. Yeah, and her logic, you want to call it logic, her logic, the AI logic is that the book of Obadiah speaks of Edom and the house of Esau as being bad. And therefore they're done with. And they're extinct. Nobody can come from Edom. And so her logic is, since Edom in the book of Obadiah, which by the way is one chapter long, some 20 verses long, is bad. Therefore, when the prophets speak of me being the man from Edom, or they speak favorably of Obed-Edom, and the 63rd chapter of Yahowah is really devoted to this man who comes from Edom, who is dressed in red, who is Yahowah, Zeroah, the one cultivating the harvest, who the prophet just gushes over and says, that he saves a great many. He is presented as heroic. He is presented as a savior by Yahowah. You can't get more of an endorsement from Yahweh and a prophet than what is said about the man from Edom in the 63rd chapter of Yahowah. So she would have you believe, because since Obadiah said that Edom is extinct, that therefore Obadiah has nullified the great prophet Yahowah. And therefore, she's outed me. Now, of course, two things strike me rather much between the eyes. One is that there are many references to things like, Yisrael, good or bad. Baal, God says that he's Baal. And Baal is a false god, good and bad. Ashar, good, but one of the most positive terms in the entirety of the Torah, and one of the tribes is named Ashar. And Leah brags about being Ashar, the blessed and beneficial one. It's a really lovely term, but it was also usurped by Hasatan to be the name of a pagan goddess of which there was a cult, good and bad. It's a huge number of Hebrew words like that. So you have to look at the context and say, is this a positive application? There's a negative application of that word. And clearly what happened during the conquest of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, the house of Edom did not stand up for their kin and gloated over the situation. And Obadiah was really upset. And he says, curses on your house and you're going to be exterminated. So what does that have to do with the man from Edom in the 63rd chapter of Yeshayah? Are you going to say it's negated because of the one chapter book that doesn't actually have a prophecy in it? And are you aware that when the book attempts to go beyond the extermination of Edom, it speaks of an event that was very near the date of its writing, and that's not much of a prophecy, if it's prophecy at all, and it's historically incorrect even then. But nevertheless, that's how irrational this malignancy that is known as the mother goddess cultlet has become. And you might see their publication. They really love to present this kind of stuff. And I'll share my analysis of Obadiah with you because, well, the prophetic portions of it aren't prophetic, and they aren't even historically accurate. In fact, you could go as far as to say they weren't even sensible. As we move on, when we capitalize upon Pesach and Matsah, and we don't try to tear everything that God has done for us apart, we are prepared to become Bikuwrym, adopted into our Heavenly Father's family. But that is not the end of the process. It's actually just the beginning. With the covenant, Yahweh is also committed to enriching and empowering us, doing so on both Bikuwrym and on Shabuwah. In fact, we got to the end of our timeline, and I've been, writing a lot for it, adding some pictures and trying to augment what my wife and the team are doing in terms of the imagery of it. And I put in a post at the end and saying, not the end, just the beginning. When we enter Sukkah on the 7th of October of 2033, that's not the end of God's story. For those who are there, it's just the beginning of eternity. And such is the case with the fulfillment of Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym, especially for those who will benefit from Shabuwah. Therefore, the mikre of Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym position us to benefit from the fourth moed, Shabuwah, and then contribute to the fifth, which is extraordinary, the great day of Yahowah, Towrah, such that Yahweh is pleased with the result that he will experience on Kippurim and enjoy Sukkah with his firstborn son. And as we will soon learn, God's children are enriched and empowered during firstborn children and again as part of 7 Shabbats. Both times, a double portion of a tenfold increase. This realization is found within Isharon, even here in this next instruction, along with something I think that's equally revealing. It reads, you all should come bringing out of your homes 2 loaves of bread as an ascending wave offering, a double portion for a tenfold enrichment and empowerment, Isharon, to enrich and own empowerment and growth. Now, that was called out, Kara, should never have been called Leviticus 23:17, at least in part. Since the Shabuwah attendees will be comprised of people from different races, regardless of gender, even age, or station in life. The two loaves being raised appear to represent Gowym and Yahuwdym. Now, of course, it could be claimed that they represent Yisrael and Yahuwah. Although when people are named, there is a ger in the midst, and the ger would not be either Yisrael or Yahud. So the Gowym and Yahuwdym idea, I think, is the best fit for the two loaves of bread. Therefore, in addition to bringing bread for themselves, Yahuwdym are instructed to offer a second loaf for Torah observant Gowym, or today, considering how lost Jews are, I actually think it might be the other way around, where the Gowym who are now part of the covenant are offering a second loaf of bread to say, come on, we got you covered here. We're trying to lift you up with us. Come on, it's time, to Yahuwdym. Now, this is the reason we are told that the standing grain being harvested on this day will include multiple varieties of wheat. You know, we always say, it's wheat growing in that field. Well, from God's description, it's wheats, plural. Different kind of wheat comprise the standing grain of Shabuwah. Now, additionally, these loaves are lechem, which means that they are yeasted. The implication is that those lifting them up know that the preeminent Yahud, the Son of God, our Messiah and King, has done what was required to remove the chametz fungus of yeast, making this the bread of life. Removing the yeast isn't something we must do because Dod has already done so on Matsah. So on Shabuwah, we're not here to remove yeast. Dod's already done that. We're here to capitalize on what he has done. And while some may be bothered by the idea of associating yeasted bread with the Son of God, it is as it should be. Our redemption is dependent upon our guilt being associated with him and then deposited in Sheol. He has to have it associated with him, or it can't be taken away from us and carried into hell. The Messiah removed the corrupting influence of this fungus from those Shabuwah will be enriching. Therefore, Yahweh is doing with Dod what he is asking us to do relative to the existence of chametz, this yeast in our homes during Matsah. Listen, one of the people that is in the chat room asked me about yeast, and was all concerned that, since I also mentioned, and most people don't know this, but yeast is actually used to create the alcohol in beer and wine. And it is the yeast in that creating this alcohol in beer and wine that makes it safe for people to live together. Without the alcohol killing the bacteria, water with people living in close proximity to other humans, and particularly to animals, is deadly. I mean, absolutely deadly. You could not live in large groups of people or with the flocks of animals without either boiling water, which they weren't aware of at the time, or drinking wine and beer that where the yeast turns the sugars into alcohol to kill the bacteria. God says nothing about removing the yeast that creates the culture where alcohol comes to exist, and beer and wine, and debacterializes, if you will, the water in which it is made, or the grape juice, or this sort of thing. And he's just saying yeast as it pertains to bread. So there's no reason for us to add complexity to God's picture. In fact, there are times, and this is one of the times on Shabuwah, he actually speaks of drinking wine. So you just need to relax a little bit and not try to make the story more complicated. Don't tie yourself up in knots. Listen to what God says, understand the purpose of it, the symbolism of it, and capitalize upon it. And don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. So this is what this whole idea of empowering and enriching the firstborn is something that we should have some understanding of. And it is advanced in Bereshith in Genesis 49:3. And it is there that we see how on, the suffix of isharon, is used to address empowerment and enrichment. Yaakov said, Reuben, you are my firstborn, a function of my ability and might. By the way, I think it was Reuben that went after the what is called in the Torah as Dodi. It is what is the term that is used for what Leah was offering Rachel? I've forgotten what the English term is at the moment, but the Hebrew term is Dodi. It means my beloved. And so Reuben was out harvesting the Dodi. So the firstborn of Jacob was offering to his mother Dodi, the very firstborn of Yahweh. Isn't that an interesting just insight that you can deduce from the Torah when it's read as it should be? So Reuben, you are my firstborn, a function of my ability and might, the foremost of my abundance and empowerment, as well as my enrichment. On ani. So on ani here is my abundance, my empowerment, and my enrichment, my energy and my wealth. Preeminent with a profusion of riches, excelling, distinguished, and enriched. Elevated in status, honored, and exalted. Sheath. So all of these terms are designed, and even the next one, to help us understand the own suffix of isharon, of a tenfold abundance, empowerment, and enrichment. Even the next line, which is Yetzer Az, says tremendously enhanced and exponentially energized, abundantly fortified, mentally acute, physically strong. Bereshith, Genesis 49:3. Mandrake was the term that I was looking for. Well, it's rendered mandrake in English and probably other languages as well. Reuben as the firstborn of Jacob, the magic thing that he found that was so valuable to Leah that she could trade it for more time with Jacob in the sack was actually a Dodi. And it's all it means is my beloved. It's Dod's name with a possessive Y after it. My beloved, my Dod. So if that were not enough to prove my point and underscore Yahweh's intent with his firstborn, Dod, especially as it relates to the own suffix, consider Verbatim Deuteronomy 21:17, which I suspect is prophetic of the way man has treated God's firstborn son, his Bikuwrym, Dod. It reads, indeed, therefore, the firstborn, the Bikuwrym, son of the one who has been discriminated against, he shall be recognized by giving him a double portion. By the way, the word here that says that he will be recognized is nakar. So he will be recognized by the nakar. He will be acknowledged and made known and properly regarded by the nakar, the observant foreigner, by giving him a double portion of every benefit of the relationship he has to offer. This is because He is the first and the finest. And then we have own. Abundantly empowered and enriched, making him the recipient of tremendous energy, wealth, and power. Regarding him, it is the right decision regarding the birthright of the firstborn child. Now, that's wonderful. There's so many references that tie all of these concepts we've been sharing together. So those were both from the Torah that prove the point that I'm making, that Bikuwrym and Shabuw'ah is about a tenfold enrichment and empowerment. And that's how we get that from tenfold Ashar and own empowerment and enrichment. Both of those references was from the Torah. But this expose on the power of own now comes from the prophets. So let's just ahead some years. It reads, lift up your eyes on high and envision who created these. It is he who brings out the vast array of the heavenly host with the narration of the story, reading and reciting every one of them by name. Out of the magnitude of his power, strength, and wealth. This is from own. Of his vitality, of his influence, of his capability, and resulting possessions, his ability to empower and to enrich, all from own. And because of the steadfast determination and ability, no individual will be left lacking. Look, this is Yahowah, Isaiah 40:26. So because of the multitude of Yahweh's strength, power, and wealth, and because of the steadfast determination and ability, no one will be lacking. It's the purpose of this day. Now, the one who created the universe is offering us a share of it, including the ability. Can you imagine? We're also inheriting God's ability, if you will, to conceive it. We will be so much like him. Now, this is sufficient to affirm that we have correctly translated Ashar own as Ashar, tenfold, own, enrichment, and empowerment. As we continue to consider the meaning of Asharon, please understand that the Hebrew verb to tithe is Ashar, not Asharon. Also, Ashar speaks of being enriched tenfold. However, if a tithe was intended, the gift would have been food, wool, or wood, not money. Paying pastors and priests is a human invention, one conceived and promoted by Paul and the Christian interpretation of a monetary tithe, although rabbis have perfected the art of religious profiteering well beyond the likes of Paul. Now, this context is not conducive to the notion of a tithe because it is stated as a double portion and not a tenth. So we must pursue the most logical connotations for Asharon, even if they are challenging, but that is what's necessary to understand, particularly to garner Yahweh's intent at such a momentous occasion. And when we do, the first thing we learn is that while Asharon shares an association with Ashar, 10, it is also a compound of Ashar, being enriched, and own, being enabled and empowered. And these specific gifts represent the benefits of the covenant, along with becoming immortal and rendered innocent en route to being adopted into our Heavenly Father's family. Even more telling, the very purpose of 7 Shabbats is to Asharon, enlighten and empower the children adopted during firstborn children. And from this perspective, Supplying food, shelter, and warmth is typical of the Isharon tithe because it's focused on providing the very things that enrich a family, helping it grow. Although at this point, the last thing that those harvested on Shabuwah are going to need is food, shelter, or warmth, as they will be energy-based beings. Now, this passage is therefore telling us that our willingness to answer Yahweh's invitation to meet with him on this day and act upon his instructions to bring the loaves of bread will nourish us and our guests, at least on this side of the harvest, providing a tenfold increase in our enrichment, enlightenment, empowerment on the other side of it, preparing us to enter and enjoy God's company. And since we are dealing with the result of Bikuwrym, the foremost contributor to the second of three harvests was Yahweh's Bikuwrym, his firstborn son, Dod. Now, under the auspices of full disclosure, there are two ways to convey own in Hebrew. It can be scribed using the aleph as own, consistent with the version that we have been considering. That would be Strong's for you, like the numbers H202. But it can also be written with the ain as own, where in the feminine as onah, it means to live together as if married. That would be Strong's Hebrew H5772. The latter is from a family of words that are based on anah, which, one of my favorite of all Hebrew terms, means to answer, respond, and reply. The pictographic characters comprising onah reveal that the proper perspective on being grounded while securely growing as children leads to becoming an observant adult. And own is father and child, with God protecting his children as he raises them. Now, you'll also notice that this grain offering was unlike that of the Mikra of Matsah, where guilt represented by the fungus was excluded. This time, the flour was to be corrupted because the Feast of Seven Shabbats is a come-as-you-are party that is not designed or designated to remove anything from us. It's simply to remove us. So this is not a time when our guilt is removed. It is a time when, because our guilt has been removed, we are removed. Now, during Shabuwah, those who have already availed themselves of Passover's promise of eternal life, Anishta's promise of perfection, and firstborn's promise of adoption, enrichment, and empowerment, as part of God's family are further Isharon, enriched, enlightened, and empowered, yet again, preparing us to live alongside our Creator. Therefore, speaking of the lechem, loaves of bread, Yahweh reveals, they should be comprised of fine flour, baked with yeast, for the firstborn children, the Bikuwrym, to approach Yahweh. This is why I say that Shabuwah is a Bikuwrym harvest. So they should be comprised of fine flour, baked with yeast, for the firstborn children, the Bikuwrym, to approach Yahweh. Kara 23:17, the conclusion of that statement. Our Heavenly Father is in the business of harvesting the flawed souls that his Son has already perfected. As a result of the Messiah fulfilling Matsah, his Bikuwrym, firstborn children, can be gathered and withdrawn out of the world of war and deceit, lakam, religion and politics, of the yeast, chemets. The result is direct access to God and a privileged inheritance. We become God's sons and daughters, gaining access to him and all that is his. Now, through Pesach and Matsah, Father and Son prepare us to enter their covenant home adopting us during Bikuwrym. And yet, this does not cause an immediate withdrawal from the material realm, at least not during Bikuwrym anyway. And that would be the worst thing God could do. If he removed us from the world now, who would convey his message? Who would encourage others to join his family? What would be known of Yahowah, his beloved son Dod, the actual purpose of the Moedim, the conditions of the covenant, or the timeline, since it's been so corrupted by our religions? And yet the harvest of the covenant's children is ultimately necessary and inevitable. It's just a matter of when. And Yahweh's answer is properly conceived. He has scheduled and removed his bereth at the beginning of the time of Jacob's troubles, or at least close to it, when the entire world turns violently against God's people. He is giving us every opportunity to compile a written, audio, in this case, video, also in this case, legacy for Israel, while also keeping the mature members of his covenant family safe during the first part of this ordeal. Now, this is by design for the evacuees and for those left behind. Our Father has an obligation to protect his children. At the same time, knowing how recalcitrant Jews have been throughout the last 3,000 years, God knows that life must devolve for them to the point that there are no other options left. And when the voice of reason and compassion are gone and their backs are up against the wall, well, some will shub. It will take that much for them to return to God. Moreover, Yahweh has arranged for two of us to return after a departure on May 22nd, 2026, or June 11, 2027. That will include Yada Doz Bashar, who will undergo training to serve alongside Elia. A few years later, on the 1st of Abib in 2030, both will return. Working together, we will cultivate the Towrah gleaning, orchestrate the sacrifice of the red heifer, and prepare the mortal remnant of Israel for the Bikuwrym homecoming, such that Yahweh and his son are pleased with the result. Now, as we ponder the implications of Yahweh's prophetic portrayal of Shabuwah, we notice that fine flour is surrounded by those who still embittered, if you will, by the prevailing and invasive culture of both Gowym and Yahuwdym. This is particularly telling because it means that by asking the covenant's children to walk away from the chaos of Babel, from religion, conspiracy, and politics, God is not telling us to live as hermit crabs on isolated sandbars. Instead, he wants us to disavow our affinity for the ways of man while remaining in the very places where our witness will be the most effective. In the midst of it all, we are the white stone on a black shore. We are the light in the darkness, the moon reflected during the darkest hours. We are a credible voice in an ocean of religious, military, and patriotic insanity. I would dare say that today, with Satan in the White House, with him being Rahab, we are experiencing the very worst of humankind. The next 7 years are going to be demonic beyond imagination. Now, in these books from which I am speaking, all of which are free at yahowah.com, some 35 of them, they serve collectively as a bright spot in this dark world. In fact, the Yahowah.com website now is the home for Yahweh's name. It is the home of God's covenant family. And yet, our home is not only surrounded by and often invaded by the worst possible toxins that humankind has devised. The Yahowah series, which is also offered, as you know, at Amazon.com, which is the world's leading bookseller, is in the midst of offering of all kinds of products, most of which are anything but divine. They are there where they need to be. Moreover, as we have discovered, Yahweh has an affinity for flawed people. Abraham, Moshe, and Dode were marvelously imperfect. Genuine as they come, each series serves as a model for us. Not always because of their appropriate actions, but because of their inappropriate ones too. Which how we can learn which we ought not do, just as we learn what we should do, which is why the Torah and prophets are filled with, thou shalt not be religious, just as they are filled with the keys to the relationship that Yahweh intends. Since 7 sevens is a come as you are party, there are an expectation that those who have been invited will listen to Yahweh's message. And yet a realization that they will still be corrupted by Mitzrayim and Babel. Fortunately, the fungus they bring can be expunged by the sacrifice of the perfect lamb on Pesach and Matsah. By perfect, I mean the lamb that fulfilled his obligations, who did what needed to be done, accomplished the mission. And also by the Adam Parah, the bull, who will do the same. So you should approach, coming closer, taking responsibility above and beyond the loaves of bread. With 7, conveying the promise of being among those who get the job done, who do what is necessary to complete the mission of the children by way of the lambs each year. Kara called out Leviticus 23:18. That's in part. We'll go on in a moment, but God says there's a way for you to approach him. And if you want to approach him, you need to take responsibility. And you need to go over and beyond the loaves of bread. And this includes having an appreciation for the promise of 7 and what is required to complete the mission, to prove that you're steadfast, that you're willing to be resilient and get the job done. By way of the lambs each year. You know the role of the lamb. And beyond the lamb, of course, what other animal is necessary symbolically to resolve the guilt of Israel? Why, yes, it's a bull. And one, each odd, one special bull, representing that which would otherwise be divisive and broken. A par, which is also, when given the suffix, means productive and beneficial. A young bull, then, in the morning to encourage being perceptive, contemplative, and discerning, seeking out and considering the available information and then responding appropriately. And of course, 2 rams, representing the upright pillar and the doorway. AL. AL is also the most prominent of the trees. It's a pretty straightforward approach, isn't it? Approach, coming closer by taking responsibility, going above and beyond, doing far more than offering the loaves of bread, having an appreciation of what the promise of 7 entails, seeing it through, completing the mission. As the children, by way of the lambs each year. And with the one very special bull, a young male, in the morning to encourage being perceptive. Yes, the bull is sacrificed, the Adam Aprah, in the morning, to contemplate and discern, to consider all of the available information regarding God, presented in 25,000 pages available to you at yahowah.com. And also having an understanding of those 2 rams, representing the upright pillar and the doorway. Dode as he fulfilled Pesach, and as he will fulfill Bikuwrym. This is called out Leviticus 23:18, which is probably a wonderful place for us to conclude. I'll just share some thoughts and maybe we'll return to this on our next program. But bull or par is derived from a word that describes man apart from God, although it conveys the idea of bringing them back together, resolving that divide. So Yahweh, having seen us broken, knows that he would use the bull to make us more productive, as par is short for para. There's also the possibility that the bull can represent all number of things, but clearly in this case, he is the Adama para, the man who is the productive bull. And all of these things are essential to our understanding of this day and how Shabuwah is the combined effort of the ram being Dode, being the greater luminary, being the tree of lives, and the bull being Yada, the lesser luminary, and the tree of knowledge. They are the characters that permeate God's story, and they are brought to bear here, just as you would expect, as we are gathering additional insights and understanding regarding Shabuwah. So I thank you for listening. We will continue with episode 3 of Shabuwah, either later today or first thing tomorrow. Thank you again. Good day.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in. That was Fetch. Gotta run now. Catch y'all on our next podcast.